Hello again, everybody. This is Steve, coming to you with a new series. This isn't like intro to writing. This is something I think applies to everybody who's a writer, everybody who is a author, regardless of your skill level, because these are key skills and things that I think that everybody should know, and not just like new writers coming in, and this is what you should know, and this is how you get started. This is something that everybody, even somebody like me who's been doing this for over 33 years, runs into. I would call them writing pitfalls to avoid. The first one I'm going to cover today is one that a lot of you probably have never heard of, because you're probably looking at the title of this and going, "What are you talking about?" A few of you might know, a lot of you won't. And this is something that has a formal name, but you don't generally hear the name used. You just hear the concept. It's known as Chekhov's gun. What Chekhov's gun is in a story, it's a kind of a tongue-in-cheek name for what I would say a very simple issue in writing that some writers, they get it right every time. Some get it wrong every time, and there's some people that are kind of in the middle at various levels of getting it right, getting it wrong, stuff like that. The simplest introduction of Chekhov's gun is if you introduce an object, a detail, or an element into the story, it should serve a purpose later. It shouldn't just exist in the story. It has to have a reason to be in there, and that's not like saying everything. You could say, like, my dad had a blue Buick car as a kid, and it doesn't have to have anything else. It's just a fact. That is like a detail about the character or one of their relatives. It's not a item that needs to be used later on. Where the term got it, where the term came from, I'm not exactly sure, but the idea is that if you have like a loaded shotgun or gun or whatever on the mantle in your story, by golly, you better be using it somewhere else later on in the book. That's kind of the idea of what it is. Why this matters is that if you follow up on these threads, it will keep your story tight and cohesive. It'll prevent readers from feeling tricked by unnecessary details, and it builds anticipation and payoff when the introduced element is the introduced element is used. So, like, to go back to the name Checkov, let's say he's got a gun on this wall and he's talking about it, he's bragging it up, and I fired it 20 times in the last week and stuff. Okay, now you're giving some weight to the object. Do you have a use for it later on, or did you use it in that particular moment? Because if you use it in that particular moment, like you're using it to show that he's really proud of the gun, he's bragging and stuff. Okay, you've used it up already. You've used up that introduction right there, so you don't have to do anything with it. But if it's introduced and it's hanging there, like it has an importance, but you don't see the importance, now you need to go down later on in the story and resolve that. Like, for example, you don't have them talk about, somebody has this beautiful, powder gray Ford pickup sitting in the driveway, and then you never hear about it the rest of the book. After you've spent all this energy building it up, okay, what exactly are you going to, why did you go to all this trouble to build this thing up? Because you might have some immediacy use for it, but if you build it up enough, you're going to have to, well, as was explained to me, you're going to have to shoot the gun later on. In other words, that is going to have to play itself out later on. Like a good example of this is I was recently going over my story, Destiny's Mission from the Earthfleet universe, and at the beginning, you meet. I'm trying to think what the captain's name was, but anyways. You meet this one captain that's talked to by the Vice Grand Admiral, and he's setting up like this mysterious mission, and he's got all these skipjack class battleships that he's going out with and stuff like this. that is something that you've set, that was something I set up at that point in time that was my loaded Chekhov's gun. That's something I now need to play out later on. It's not, oh, that's nice, you just put somebody out on a mission, sent them off into the galaxy, and then nothing ever came of it. No, don't do that. You've set it up, you've given it background, you've given it foundation. Now you got to use it somewhere. If you, like I say, if you use it in the immediate moment, and you don't need to, you should still use it later on because it'll add more to your story, but you don't need to. But if you set it up and then don't use it, you absolutely need to follow through with it later on. Key principles on this is to, like, when you introduce a significant item, introduce it with an intention. Every object, every line of dialogue, or minor detail about it is a potential plot tool. What's also nice about this is if you do set up one of these Chekhov's guns, it gives you something else to write about. So if you get, say you're writing, you introduce something earlier in the book, and you're going along and you get stuck. You don't know how to resolve a particular part. Go back and figure out what items that you introduced at the beginning that have significance weren't resolved later on in the book, or were they resolved but you can use them again. Those will help you write stuff and fill things in. I'm trying to think of another good example of it. That's good for fixing writer's block. Another one, like you can have, like in my orc perimeter, you hear towards the end of the book, you hear about Sevik, and you've already, earlier you've already heard about Sevik, but later on in the book you hear about Sevik, and you hear Vasin over here going, yeah, send Sevik. Okay, that's my Chekhov's gun. You just sent Sevik. What the heck is he doing? Where is he going? What's his purpose? Well, then he shows up a chapter or two later in the middle of the fight at the most, at the point when Earthfleet's defenses are about ready to collapse. In comes the cavalry with Sevik leading them. And, that right there is the resolution to the Chekhov's gun that I set up when I initially introduced him earlier in the book, and then also the Go Send Sevik part later in the book. So that's a good one. And also this brings you to the foreshadowing subtlety. He's foreshadowed. You see bits about him. He's talked about, he has a fleet, so there's a little bit of foreshadowing there. The payoff comes when he suddenly appears and just basically curb stomps the Varnok Black Fleet. And he comes in at just the perfect time because it looks like all hope is lost. And then in comes your cavalry, which in this case was Sevik riding on the back of a battlecruiser. So, that's good for storytelling right there. And the nice thing about this too, with the foreshadowing, or the subtlety of foreshadowing, is you don't have to yell to the reader that this is important. Make it noticeable enough for them to register and realize, okay, this has potential further down the line, so they're going to put the radar up and watch for it. And then, again, like I was saying, once you put that on their radar, it has to pay off later on. It has to influence the plot, a character action, a theme, or any number of things. Because, one of the other things, too, with a Chekhov's gun is you don't necessarily, or an item that is that Chekhov's gun, is you don't need it to, like if you say, this particular Imperial cruiser was such and such and so, and it did all this, and you set up all that background, you don't have to drag that Imperial cruiser into the story. That cruiser could set up a theme that's used elsewhere. I don't have a specific example of that, but you could, maybe like that cruiser sets up a lore, and then that lore plays into a character action or the plot later on. So that's still a fulfillment of that philosophy. Common examples, going back to one of the ones I already used, is a gun hanging on the wall in Act 1 needs to be fired in Act 3. Which I've already covered, but this just kind of reiterates that in a little simpler way. It's a little simpler way of explaining it. Which is where the term comes from, by the way. is the idea that, like if you have a gun hanging on the wall in Act 1, it needs to be fired by Act 3. In other words, it needs to be used by that, by some point in the book. If it's introduced early, maybe use it in the middle. If it's introduced it in the middle, maybe use it late. In Destiny's Mission, I introduced him early. It didn't show up until late, which is, that's entirely allowable. It's as long as you use it and you don't just leave the people hanging going, okay, why did you go to all this effort and then never use it? That'll frustrate a reader to no ends, and they'll throw your book away if if it's bad enough. Because they get frustrated. They're like, they're all hyped up for this thing, and then nothing comes of it. And like I said, that's the fastest way to get your book thrown in a burn pile. Also, a seemingly trivial quirk of a character becoming crucial later on in solving a conflict is another example of that. Because you have, it might be trivial. It might be a major tick. It might be a minor tick. It might be an actual tick. I don't know. But it's something about the character that comes around later and plays an important role. Because if you look at Pendleton in Earthfleet Dark Earth, if you've read the books, you know how or what kind of personality he is. Well, that personality trait, that kind of bold, brash pilot's mentality, plays a big role in how he plans things, how he strategizes, and how he sets up all of his plans and everything like that. So that character tick becomes a major plot point. Another thing you can have is like a small prophecy, a rule, a gadget introduced early on to help resolve a later problem. In the going back to Earthfleet, just to stay on that theme, in the Oort perimeter, there's this big division in the galaxy between the 9 races. 5 go one direction, 4 go the other, and all of it's over a prophecy. Well, that prophecy has immediate effects. It's impacting a lot of things, but then later on, towards the end, it plays an even bigger role because it's not just a prophecy that's kind of told in like a really short summary. The whole prophecy is read and explained, and the Varnock ambassador realizes, oh crud, we've been reading this prophecy the wrong way, and we're actually in the wrong here, not the right, like we thought we were. Well, that now takes and turns a whole bunch of things around and changes the whole dynamic of the story flow at that point in time. It also, interestingly enough, plays into elements in Book 2, which is Destiny's Mission, because now you have a split of the Varnock. You have one faction that's very anti-Earth, and one faction that's very pro-Earth, which is ironic, because you got this gigantic super race that's fighting over a single system species. And it seems small, but it has a big impact, and it's played out throughout the book as you go along. Now, pitfalls to avoid in this, which goes back to some of what I was saying, is introducing objects that are never used, because it feels sloppy and it creates loose ends. And like I said, you'll frustrate your readers 6 ways to Tuesday, and they'll just like burn your book out of frustration. Another thing you want to avoid is over-explaining the element's importance. It ruins the subtlety and suspense of that object. You want to tease it and give only enough information to set it up in the story and its importance. Like Weaver's Forge. When I start out with the actual forges, which they're a highly advanced weapon system, but when they're in their powered down inert form, they look like a Fabergé egg. And then when they activate, they change and become this power suit that gives the wearer all these superpowers and stuff. And it's a form of very, very high-end technology. But when I started out, it's the item, basically what it is, maybe little characteristics, just enough to get the reader started, and they're like, okay, there's a significance about this, but they don't know what. And then you gradually tease a little bit, which is what I do. I gradually tease little bits of it down the road until all of a sudden, oh, the egg just went active and somebody just got themselves a new pair of PJs, or a new power suit or whatever you want to call it. And that right there, because when the big reveal happens that, oh, this is a Weaver's Forge, it's a weapon system. It's built using what was it? It's built using, or it's built out of a quantum alloy. Which a quick explanation of a quantum alloy is, it's something that it's not an alloy from the atomic sense, like you add oxygen and hydrogen and helium and or whatever molecule or atoms together to create a molecule. This quantum alloy is a material made from quarks and leptons and gluons and all that stuff. They're basically the building blocks. It's made of the building blocks of atoms and the building blocks of the building blocks of atoms. So it's very, very, very advanced technology. And that you don't get that whole thing. You have to go a ways before you finally get all the bits and pieces and parts of what it is. And that, like I said, you don't give them everything up front. You kind of tease them. You go, here's a silver coin. You move on. Okay, this is a 1972 silver coin. Okay, you move a little on. This silver coin has Abraham Lincoln on the front of it. Move on a little further. And you dribble this out to them along the way. And okay, and then maybe the next thing you do is, oh, this silver coin comes from from my grandpa's collection, and he bought it from so and so, and they did such and such with it. And now you're starting to add history to it. But if you're adding history, the history has to play back into the story with some importance, because otherwise you create a Chekhov's gun of your Chekhov's gun. So, also another pitfall you want to avoid is making the item predictable. It's this is probably oversimplification, but let's just say the item you introduce is an airplane. The predictable part is that the airplane can fly. Everybody knows they can fly. So the plane flying is not the surprise item. Maybe the surprise item is that this plane is secretly owned by the President of the United States. Now it's not predictable. The predictable part is it flies. It's a plane. That's a given. The unpredictable part is it's owned by the President of the United States. That because you want to surprise the reader with certain elements of that particular Chekhov's gun or element that you're introducing into the story. Another thing, just kind of a final quick tip for writers when it comes to working with this particular plot element or plot object, is to ask yourself, when adding something to a story, could this come back later? And if not, or could it be used later? And if not, why is it there? If it does not have a purpose, don't add it. It's like, it works the same. Well, works the same way with objects as it does with characters. One of the things I was taught years ago is if you're going to introduce a character and they're going to be a one and done, don't give them a name unless you absolutely have to. If they have a significance in the story or they have a recurring role, give them a name. If they're a one and done, don't. Call them like, the lieutenant walked into the room. That's all you have to do. You just address them as lieutenant. Gives the reader everything they need to know. If there's somebody who is going to be a recurring person, you say, yeah, Lieutenant David walked into the room and he was wearing, blue shoes and a green uniform and he has his beanie on his head, something like that. And yeah, you're probably laughing at that, but you get the idea. That, the amount you the amount you pour into a character or an object depends on how useful or how it is to the story, either in that moment or in the overall tale. The more useful, the more you want to pour into them. The less useful, the less useful, the less you pour into them. So, and I think that's all I have for this. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I've already covered or haven't covered, but should cover. Oh, well, if you want another example just to throw out there real quick before I call this. an example of a Chekhov's gun that you could have in your story, especially like if you're into murder mysteries, is say somebody walks in there like a police officer or something, and they're standing there like, just talking to you, minding their business and everything, and there's this faint smell of something decaying. You don't have to go into it a lot. It's just that there's that little odor. And then as they're standing there and they're talking, the story keeps going on. Maybe they don't address it right away, but there's that, the cop can't let go of that. He smells that. It's registered in his brain. He can't let go of it. And then maybe 3 chapters along the line, they find out somebody's missing, and they were last seen in the area of this guy's house. Oh, okay, let's go back and explore that. And they go in there, and yeah, there's that odor again. And can we please look at your house? No, you'll have to do that with a warrant. Oh, red flag right there. They come back with a warrant. They find out that this guy, killed the missing person. He's down in the guy's basement, shoved in a closet, rotting like a good little corpse. So that's how you would take that little odor that they smell, which becomes your Chekhov's gun, and then you start playing it out through the story, creating suspense, creating plot line, things like that. So, yeah, I think that's all. If there's more, I'll catch it up in another episode. But anyways, that's the basics of this, and it's a very, very important detail that, while it's not usually named, it's still something that every writer has to be aware of. It's something I pay close attention to, even if I may not do it perfectly. I pay close attention to this. Others pay close attention to this. It's one of those things that you never want to forget, because if you forget it, it'll hurt your story. It may only hurt it a little in some situations. It'll hurt it a lot in others, but you just want to make sure that that's avoided. Trying to think. Oh yeah. Anyways, that's all I got for this one. I've got other episodes coming up after this, which will include things such as like invisible threads, rhythm and pacing awareness, and stuff like that, for you guys to to think about, to understand, to put. It's not something that you have to have on a placard by your computer while you're writing. It's something that you want to lodge in the back of your mind, so that as you're writing, you're like, wait, I wrote about the cat over here. Why did he disappear and you don't hear about him anymore? Because he was, I made a big deal out of him over here, but now he's nothing. Okay, we need to close that. Take that open loose end and do something with it. So, anyways, catch you guys on the next video. And if you have any questions, comments, things you want me to talk about, future episodes, future ideas, stuff like that, please let me know. Thanks.